So, as you know, the last month of retreat, I was down in the writing studio writing about grief. Um, and David Kessler, who was the co-author of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's final book on grief and grieving, reports that she said to him, "You cannot write about grief if you don't get in touch with your own grief," which is kind of self-evident. And I fully expected that. So it's not like you necessarily intentionally sit down there and go, "Oh, where's my grief?" Right? but you know, to the sources I was drawing from were many, but particularly, of course, from the death of my mother. Now that was 11 years ago, so it's been some time. But then to revisit what I wrote then, or the talks that I gave then, bringing up a new perspective on that, and also kind of reliving some of it. And then my sister's recent death is still fresh. You know, that grief, what has been processed, you know, how I think about it is still very present. And so in the course of that too, writing about, you know, not just my own stories. I mean, right now there's a lot that's very personal in this manuscript that may well come out, but had to be written in order to write the Dharma part. So we'll see how that goes. You know, I went back. I went way back. And this really started to dig some things up for me. I mean, it's so interesting, the number of people who have died, who have been in touch, who've had their hands on this manuscript is interesting. Just, it's the way things are. But you know, recently, right before I go down there, to find out that my mother's husband died right at the New Year, and then I didn't even know for many weeks. Or Lila, you know, who asked me to support her in these final weeks, died right before I went in to write about this. So that's all very fresh. But I was also revisiting experiences of death and dying that I was very close to 35, 40 years ago. And that was during the HIV/AIDS crisis. Whereas working with the Reiki AIDS project, there was no medicine for people with HIV/AIDS, and any alternative that was offered was welcomed by the entire medical establishment. So we were quite legitimate there for a few years. So the Reiki AIDS project worked with people with HIV/AIDS, and I had the opportunity to really sit with the dying of quite a few people. I also co-taught weekend workshops on how to work with AIDS and dying with two friends who were more qualified than I was. But anyway, I had a lot of students then in that cohort of people who were definitely going to die. There was no way around it. They were going to die, and most of them did. So revisiting that time, I mean, I'm surprised, actually, how few people are aware today about what that was like. It's a little shocking to me that people don't carry this memory forward, partly because of the cruelty of the federal government, mostly under Ronald Reagan, that just refused to deal with the issue for years. Anthony Fauci was the head of the NIAID, whatever that is, the National Institute of Infectious Diseases or something. He made strides in making this happen. But from 1981 was the first recorded US case. Actually, now they know it was way sooner than that, but 1981 was the first recorded US case. There was no treatment drug until 1987. 6 years of no treatment for people dying of HIV/AIDS. And, you know, of course, that was all colored by the bigotry of the fact that it was mostly affecting gay men. We don't care. I mean, literally, that was said out loud. We don't care. That's their problem. That is their sin. It is a payment for their sin. Out of that, for one thing, then, people who weren't gay men were never tested. My first client was a woman who was not tested. Her 2 baby boys were born with HIV. They got it in utero. But because she wasn't a gay man, she was never tested, right? So working through that period of grief also brought up some remembered rage. You know, even as I talk about it right now, that it pops up for me. So, so to revisit that time and to look at grief and to look at the relationship between grief and sadness and the grief and anger, you know, my own relationship to this whole scene was very vivid. And so I was writing this stuff towards the end of the time, and it was coming towards the end of our pravarana, and towards the end of our retreat. And then into my mind, of course, pops this song I wrote 35 years ago in protest called Jesus, Please Protect Us from Your Servants on the Right. And so the song is going into my head. So we come to the skit time. And I think, and well, the other thing too, the song has come up, and I'm looking at the lyrics in my mind thinking, the same thing is happening again with our government. Only this whole movement of morality that is being claimed to be the way to be by one group of people or one worldview is creating all kinds of suffering in this country. So I'm like re-triggered. There's no question about that, right? And I'm also, just to know, I'm down there alone talking to nobody. So on the one hand, it was very good. It was very good for a number of reasons. One is it really kept me focused on what I was there for. Two, it helped me see, because it's been a long time since I've had that kind of time alone, to really see how much I have grown to rely on my own self. And also on the Dharma. So it was a validating. But it also means that you don't actually know how crazy you are, right? That happens when you. And I even said at confession before to the nuns in the senior group, I said, I'm a little bit wild. I don't know what will come out of my mouth because I've been down there alone for so long. So anyway, all that was behind this idea about, okay, I'm going to do this song for the skit. And so it took me a half an hour to update it. It didn't take very long. I took time with Venerable Kunchuk, who did the background music, and we both agreed that we had very much too much fun doing it, that was a dangerous thing to have done. It triggering both of our pasts. We agreed. So, and I kept thinking, now, why am I doing this? What is my motivation? I'm trying to check what's my motivation. Why am I doing this? And I thought, this is pertinent. It's relevant. Besides that, it's satire. So in the end, as you know, I put on the cowboy hat, I put on the beard, I sat down in the chair, and I did the song. Now, I recognized, even in the middle of it, that it was not funny. And I also recognized, even in the middle of it, that I was angry. Okay, I'm angry. Done, done, done. Applause, applause, thank you very much. So a couple of days later, my teacher sort of casually stops me and says, you know, that wasn't really appropriate. Just your song was not really appropriate. And I said, well, it was irony, I said, because my brain is such that I can no longer pull up words quickly, and satire is what I meant, but she knew what I meant. She said it didn't come across that way. And I knew even then that she was right. I don't think I pushed back. I think I said, okay. And so it was extremely, as always, helpful feedback to hear back, oh, no, it was not appropriate. It was not appropriate to do. It was not an appropriate thing to bring into this group. And I will tell you some of the things that were why. One of them was that there's no compassion, right? Zero, when anger is present. This is just a fact. There is no compassion. So to be able to stand up and say that I want to be able to speak up and speak out about to right the wrongs, but not to be able to do it from a place of compassion, is a totally hypocritical thing for me to do. I preach it. All of our protests must come from compassion, right? But here am I, still angry, fueled from something that happened 35, 40 years ago. It's like, I was looking at my coffee cup, an unwashed teacup, sorry, my teacup. I have not had a coffee cup in almost 20 years now. No coffee. And also coffee does not leave the stain like tea does. You have that tannic black thing. It's like, it's got that kind of tannic stain is still in my mind with regards to some issues, including, and perhaps especially, when I look at the values of the Christian right, in part because I was raised by good Christians, and they were good people. And it breaks my heart. It really breaks my heart to see the values that my grandmothers in particular embodied, spoken in a way that I also see brings so much harm. So that is a deep respect for Christianity, but at the same time, when I'm not sure what Venerable's next sentence was, but it was something like, they mean well. And I instantly heard this voice of Lama Yeshe that she speaks often. They means well, dear. And I know that that is also true. And it is my own bias, my own bigotry that is so angry and so hateful from my own experience, okay? But still, to not be able to own and recognize that this is anger that I need to antidote. I cannot do effective work in any way, and I can't really be an honest Buddhist nun practitioner preaching about the value of working with anger if I can't get access to those deeper places where I still can feel a lot of pain and a lot of rage come up. So that's part of it. It was really, really important to be able to have this come out. I also know full well, this is totally worldly, but from a performance point of view, satire doesn't work if you're angry. You can't do it from an angry place. It's not funny. It's just angry. So I'm sorry for the bad performance in that way, but that leads me to also recognizing that this is on a much more personal identity level, that there is, and this has been one of the most challenging, sometimes painful places for me in terms of my monastic life, is that before I could talk, I was singing. And I only know how to access some emotions doing that. And that's just how it's always been my whole life. And we don't do that. I mean, in the writing studio, I do. But I confess it, I do. But to somehow to get in this moment to recognize that, that person who wrote protest songs, they went over big in the little coffee houses and the folk life festivals and things that we were performing in. That was a long time ago. That's a different person. That is a completely different person. And A, it doesn't need to be expressed. And B, the mode of doing that brings a whole other raft of bad motivations or mixed motivations or being seen in a certain kind of way. It brings a whole image. It brings a whole thing there that still, at least after doing this thing, I'm ready to drop it. Okay, let's stop. Whatever's left of it, I've been trying to get rid of it in lots of different ways. But it's also, so it's seeing the worldly clinging on habits of how to deal, especially with difficult emotions or difficult topics. How the worldly habit from way back when tries to cling, still clings on, and what it takes to change ourselves. It's a long process. It's not just because I started older. It's maybe easier if you don't have the 35 years before that or the 55 years before that or whatever, not to have corrected. But it's also humbling to recognize how deep our habits are, how deep our conditioning is, and how we can never let up. I can never let up on reconditioning my mind and my way of thinking. And also, to hold myself with some acceptance. Some acceptance that that's where we're coming from, and I can't always see, like in this case, what was my motivation? I was checking, what is my motivation? What is my motivation? I couldn't see it. I couldn't see it until it was pointed out to me. So anyway, here's a nice line, I like it. It's like that old snake skin of a once upon a time is finally ready to come off. So we'll see. So pre-pravarana, I want to apologize for bringing that kind of venom into this very pure and holy space. I want to apologize for, our end of retreat activity is sacred. And I did bring, unconsciously, but definitely not appropriately, bring a lot of negative energy into that space. If it upset your mind, I apologize for that. If you enjoyed it, that's very nice, but please check your own mind. I know there are people who probably recognize what was happening, even as it was going on. So, yeah, and that just brings me down, going on and on and on, I'm sorry. But it just brings me back to the preciousness of living in community over such a long period of time, living in the Dharma over such a long period of time, and continuing to just chisel away, chisel away, chisel away, chisel away as best we can. And knowing that we are doing our best. And stuff that gets buried takes a long time to come up sometimes. So thank you very much for having been the witness and for receiving my apology.